Welcome. This is our third Paul Klee exhibition, second in New York, and working with the Paul Klee family. These are all works coming from the great-grandson of Paul Klee, and with the support of the Zentrum Paul Klee. We have a little growing tradition with Paul Klee, who's sort of, in my mind, the ultimate artist, of inviting artists to speak about or in conversation about the work. Our first show, we invited Richard Tuttle. That show was focused really on 1939, which was the second to last year of his life. He was very ill. He died in 1940, very prolific year. And Richard Tuttle spoke brilliantly. It'd be very hard for me to summarize what he said, but at the time it was powerful. This year, we invited the painter and publisher of books, Matt Connor, whose work I think most of us here know. He's been exhibiting, he studied at Bennington, which was in a way a little bit of a Bauhaus situation in Vermont in those years, especially, very cross-disciplinary, and then at Yale, and he's been exhibiting for the last 20 years. Has an exhibition coming up with Alès Ortuzar next month. He shows as well with Herald Street Projects, the Modern Art Institute, and Xavier Hufkens in Belgium. So let me ask you 3 questions, and then you pick one that you want to answer.
Okay.
So Klee being this really, there's such stylistic diversity here in this work from the 1920s and 30s. Paul Klee, was he more of an influence, his work or particular bodies of work, or more Paul Klee the artist? That's question number 1.
Okay.
Question number 2, when did you first encounter Paul Klee? And generally, what do you take from Paul Klee as an artist, as a painter?
I mean, I went to a really large high school in Southern California, and like the art school was like, or sorry, the art classes were like bong making basically. So, but I like made my own little thing, and I got really into Dadaism, and I think that might be the very first time I ever saw him. But I like your question about like, is it the work or is it the artist? Because it's really his practice and his approach, and like there's like kind of this incredible like magic of like non-hierarchical approach to like drawing is just as important as painting, and maybe more important, and is present in the painting, and the materials is like a witch's kitchen, kind of like just so many. It's just like super free. As soon as I discovered, there is kind of like a, I think I was telling you earlier, I would react maybe a little bit against like this kind of cliche image of what you know of Paul Klee, but when you dig, like it gets a little samey and like period, from what you're only shown the same things. But when you see the expanded view, it's just, he's kind of like outside of time, and he's doing things that feel really radical. And this show to me, like learning stuff from you has really like made that even more apparent for me. And I think it's kind of something, his poetic lightness, which is actually very impactful, is something that I take from him, and I think is missing from a lot of things that I would want to see more of, really.
Well, it's amazing to think about the time when these works were made. There was so much change going on. He lived through, and actually was in World War I.
Right.
He was in the Bauhaus through the 20s, and then he moves back to Switzerland. And the last decade was very difficult. And you see his influence and interest in caricature. The work can be very political, can be very abstract and poetic. But I think for me, what connects to today's world is just the sort of cosmic excess. He was really interested in things not seen, not visible. And they're almost psychedelic. And they're the ultimate form of escape as a viewer. You can really just put yourself in the hermit's hut and imagine what it's like to live.
Yeah, and I think even in this room and other rooms, you can just see him zooming in and zooming out and taking things from one work and bringing it to another, and like some of them are really barely there, and some of them are incredibly like overworked, but it doesn't feel like the barely there ones are any less important to him for sure.
Right.
And just makes you then look at the other ones differently. I don't know, it's just nice to, it's really nice for me to think about you doing these series of shows that if someone were to see them all, it would just like continue this, like change the way you see him every time.
We try. Thank you. But the title, Psychic Improvisation, which is kind of a leaning into the more surrealist
Right.
side of Clay. It's a little ambiguous, I think. It's a quote from him, because when you think of improvisation, you think of something that is freehand and improvised and not planned. And yet, you're very interested in music. Clay was really, he could have been a classical violinist. His parents were steeped in music and taught piano and violin. He could have gone that route, but he was deeply interested and knew the musicians of his day. How would you talk about improvisation in a musical sense in relation to Clay?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very improvisatory, but there's ideas of improvisation that, or I think the popular conception of improvisation is just like freewheeling and, you know, searching in the dark, but most improvisation is super rigorous. And like I went to Bennington, and when I was in Bennington, I studied music actually, and there were all these like New York free jazz musicians studying there. So like as an 18-year-old, I had to study improv with Milford Graves and like Bill Dixon, all these crazy people, and it was like really scary to me, and it was really rigorous and it was intense, and we used to go like sit on the floor during rehearsals, and just learned very quickly that it's not, it's free, but it's like also incredibly structured. Yeah, right. And it's something that's a long journey, and so like you can really see that in like it's just like a redefinition of the idea of freedom and improvisation, which again I think is kind of missing from like a lot of things. Yeah. Just looking around the room, and it's hard now with everyone here, but there's some drawings here that look so close to like a children's drawing, like that one in that corner there. Why is it not, like if you put that up against a drawing by a 6-year-old, 5-year-old, why is it so different? I think it's totally different. Yeah.
But it's really close on the other hand.
And also this one over here that's like a really like typical doodle. It's like a
the knot drawing.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about like the position of the drawing on the paper and just the entire presentation. Just like it really like it zooms in and focuses in on like on line as a real like important thing that's doing a job and has a weight and a presence and a direction. And I mean, he's clearly understands children's, you know, like it was something that people were talking about.
The purity of it,
yeah.
the innocence.
But it's also just like, these drawings weren't like that, like, you know, typical like house one, like that wasn't thrown away. It was kept, it was annotated, numbered.
Right.
And it's clearly really important to him. And yeah, so I think that just even that question does, or you know, it's a question that I get a lot of, like my kid could do that thing. It comes at me a bit.
It's a perennial question.
And I'm always like, yeah, great, your kid could, yeah, let's do it.
Let's try
go.
it.
Yeah.
Let's try.
Yeah, it's just his thinking and his brain is so, like the psychedelic of looking so long and then stepping away, and the prolificness is something, like I recently had to write something about Ray Johnson too, and it just got me thinking about prolificness, just like what happened. It's almost like a trance state, it's very musical.
There's a great connection between Ray Johnson and Clay, just the way they use the whole page and the collaging aspect.
Yeah, I had to write for this book, and I was thinking, like, what if you turn the book into like a flip book? Because like Ray like repeated so much, and I was like, it would kind of have this really strange animation. I've been thinking about animation in these works too, like just within your head after looking at them. So I mean, it's exciting to think about them in relationship to children's drawings. For me, it's not like a problem.
Me too. I have no problem.
Yeah, yeah.
But
the knot one in particular, like it's like just the two words, like paths to the knot. I think it's called Pathways to a Knot. But yeah, like that was probably a pretty difficult drawing to get into and to follow, to create that. And
just to give a little background on how clay has been presented over the years, he would make his work, and then when there were maybe 10 works finished, he would mount them on these boards, very intentionally, not in the center of the board in most cases, and then he would give them a title and archive number. He was a kind of obsessive archivist of his own work and his own life. And that's why we have the titles here on the wall, because they're actually so poetic and interesting in German, and they translate well into English. And he thought about the titles. They give humor, they complete the work. And the way we're presenting them here, which we've done in the last years, is we actually show the whole mat, and we don't crop in like it's a drawing, but really like it's more than a drawing.
Yeah.
It's existing on.
And that was news to me, and that was like very exciting. Like that's so exciting to me. And I asked you earlier, what would Paul Klee do? What would he think of that removal, or what would he think of how it had been presented until now? Because to me, it's just like it's
He hated fussiness,
right,
in pretty much everything. So he wouldn't have wanted a Passepartout type mat. He obviously didn't throw anything away. He hated waste paper baskets. He was very thrifty, very resourceful. And when you think about, I mean, he was sharing a house in Dessau, in the Bauhaus, at the Bauhaus with Kandinsky and Albers, literally watering Kandinsky's plants. They were watering each other's plants. Right. And he was a very famous artist. He had exhibitions. He sold his work, but they really barely supported, they could barely support the family. His son was there. They formed a little Paul Klee society so people could pay a small subscription fee. Yeah. And that was just barely enough. And then when we talk about inflation today, everyone's obsessed with inflation, interest rates. But inflation in those days, they were paid every 2 days because otherwise they couldn't afford groceries. Right. The currency was just going like crazy. Right. So it was just another world. Yeah. And,
so I just think the revelation of this information is just so, of the drawing is so rich and gives so much more of this background.
Do we want to go into a more colorful room?
Sure.
With figures?
Okay.
Okay. So this room is, I guess the installational conceit is the figure from caricature-like figures to cartoon-like figures from the early 20s through the late 30s, and figures and animals in motion. I just want to say, though, what's unbelievable about this group of works and this whole show is these works have been in anywhere from 50 to 75 Paul Klee Museum shows since the time they were made. So it's, the fact sheets on these works are long, and they've been all over the world. And that's, just to think about that is kind of fascinating. Yeah. But Matt, you pick something that you sort of are drawn to and that you might want to talk about.
I mean, I just think this room was really surprising to me, and you know, my resistance to like the Paul Klee that I knew was very gratified in here because I'm discovering a new Paul Klee. But I think that like this piece is just it's just incredible. This and that wall, I don't know. It's just like they're all just the freedom and like the relationship between each other, and there's nothing in the show is not at all chronological, and it jumps all over the place. And you know, he dealt with World War II. You know, he had to leave Germany and go to Switzerland, and he also had a terrible disease at the end of his life, and he was very, you know, he faced a lot of intense things. And what I really like about the work and that I really appreciate is that it's not very one-to-one. It's not very descriptive of like World War II or his illness or his pain. It's like it's broaching these subjects through like looking internally and poetics and, you know, ideas that are not super like didactic or in your face. And I feel like this room is super free and the most psychedelic and just like bringing you in and out of all these different ideas swirling together.
It's true. You could see his work in relation to his own physical condition. He was extremely ill by 1935. I think 1937 he made 25 works. And then what happened in 1939 was extraordinary. He made over 1,000 works. And more than like 10% of his whole body of work was made that year in great pain. And of course he's aware of what's happening in Germany. He fled 33, the Nazis shut down the Bauhaus in 31, and then he was in the Degenerate Art Exhibition. But then there's this whole other level that they're existing, which is why we're still looking at them, and they're kind of outside of time.
Yeah, I think that's that we're still looking at them. They're not like tied so directly to anything. They're like really confusing, mysterious, problematic, and they're all just like throwing like rocks at each other and like complicating each other. And I was talking to a friend, another painter, telling him I was doing this, and I was like, I kind of, it's kind of hard to figure out where he sits and everything. And he said, I was actually like shelving my art books last night, and I couldn't figure out where to put Paul Klee. Like it didn't fit, like in Dadaism or Surrealism or like he just like, and I was like, yeah, that's basically what's good about it. It's what will make it like live in your mind and heart a little bit longer.
I think because they're mostly paper, there's this intimacy. People think of them as drawings. He made different distinctions between works. If they were had color, and they were on, depending on the medium, they were paintings, but drawings meant no color. And that was more than half of what he made were drawings.
Yeah, I mean, I was asking about the ratio of drawings, because drawing is very important to me, and I feel like it lives inside of most things I do, even if it's not a drawing. But yeah, I was happy, surprised, not surprised, to learn that the ratio is very high on the works on paper, I guess. And I was just listening to another lecture that was really like very nerdily based on Klee's materials, and this person was just like listing like one of the materials was like cloth from inside of an airplane wing, an old German warplane wing that he would use over. So like there's just no hierarchy, and it's just incredibly like there's this almost like force of necessity, and just the like immediacy of drawing, even it just lives in all of the work, which to me is some of my favorite artworks. Or I don't know, drawing is really king for me.
Good to hear. We can open it up to questions. I just want to read one short quote that I stumbled upon by the surrealist writer Hugo Ball, which I think kind of summarizes what we've been talking about. In the age of the Colossus, Klee falls in love with the green leaf, a star, a butterfly's wing. I know of no man more in touch with his inspiration than Paul Klee.
Yeah, that's kind of why this show feels so great right now. It's like there's so much going on in the world, and I just feel like he's really looking at it. He's not looking at it, but he's diving in, really.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.